for the opportunity to talk about vaccines, which I have been doing recently in many fora. Um, this particular presentation, I want to just give you some disclosures that I don't have any conflict of interest. I don't have any consultancy fee from any company, including NGC. My only mission is to educate based on science, and this presentation is purely based on scientific facts. What we can do is that while I give this talk, I won't take more than 30 minutes, hopefully. I'll try to explain the vaccines in detail, and I've told the MC that if you have some questions right um, during my presentation, you can put it in the chat, and we will collate all the questions at the end, and we will try and have a long interactive sessions, and that's the whole idea of this presentation. So the outline of my presentation is going to be the introduction to vaccines in general, then the epidemiology of COVID-19. This is a computer simulation from the University of Utah. This is exactly how the COVID virus behaves when it gets into the system. I'll tell you about the epidemiology and the variants which have come in, and the vaccines for the COVID which are existing, how do they work, and what is herd immunity. I want to touch upon the infodemic which is happening recently with the misinformation. And as late as last evening, you would have seen one of our own Caribbean prime ministers being hit by a rock for a simple thing just as vaccination. I am saying simple. I know that many people say that it's not simple, but at the end of the presentation, I am hoping that you will understand the science behind it and the misinformation being spread. Okay, so even as early as 1000 Common Era, there was some sort of a technique called variolation. Variola is the technical term, Latin term for smallpox. So they actually took the smallpox fluid and then tried and inoculate to others to prevent smallpox coming in without knowing the science behind it. But there were records of this technique called variolation in China, Africa, and Turkey. Everybody, the Eurocentric world. We all also being colonial, victims. We all think that everything came out of Europe. But we did have many things in many parts of the world, in China, Africa, and Turkey. It was all recorded in the history. And the first ever, trial of a vaccination was, of course, by Edward Jenner in 1796, and then the rabies vaccine was developed by Louis Pasteur in France. And it's not new. Throughout the history, vaccination has its own cultural oppositions. But I wanted to just tell you that, the list of diseases currently prevented by vaccines, you can see the list. I'm not going to read through all of them, but I wanted to say that the ones with the asterisk, the smallpox and polio, have been eradicated from the face of the earth only because of vaccine. So, and the other diseases are, I will show you the amount of immunity it provides because of vaccine. So as I told you, as Anissa told, I did a PhD in health economics, and if you see the trend of increase in life expectancy, longevity of humans, in the 1700s it was around 40, if you could see this. And then, it just climbed up with the hygiene measures and stuff like that, public health and public hygiene, it went up here. And since the vaccine came up, it just had a very big leap. And, the vaccines and the antibiotics were the ones, the infectious diseases were killing people like people were dying of like flies. And you would have known that, in 1912, the Spanish flu killed millions of people. And they didn't even know that there is a virus existing that time. The public health measures, antibiotics and vaccines were the main reason for the gain in the life expectancy. And this is a very well known fact. So, what happens in COVID? I mean, the individual epidemiology of individual countries can vary a little bit, but the general trend remains the same. That the spectrum of the disease, fortunately for us, 80% of the people have only mild symptoms, a fever, a cold-like symptoms. Coronavirus is well studied, and coronavirus is a family which causes a lot of respiratory infections, including common cold. So the COVID-19 per se, 80% of the people get away with that, and you would have seen that, and then 14 to 15% of the people get severe form of illness requiring hospitalization, and overall 5% of the people have to be admitted into the intensive care unit. And I do work in an intensive care unit, so I must say that we see the numbers going up because the overall number of infections is also going up. So if you see the amount of people dying from COVID, the overall mortality is around 2.5%. So the critically ill, 5% get into ICU, and only 50% of them survive. So 2.5 is the overall mortality. The initial COVID waves, we would have seen the elderly people having a higher mortality. 80 and above were around 15%, and the 70 was around 8%. But however, at this point of time, this particular case fatality rate has changed with these age groups, and we are seeing much more younger age group. So this is the general epidemiology of COVID. So what happens? Why there is a variant? Now, the first variant, if you would have remembered, came out of UK, out of Kent, where actually people started treating COVID with plasma, with the people recovered from what we call as a convalescent plasma. So at that time, the virus couldn't actually get into many people to replicate itself. So what happens is, in an intensive care unit, what we see as a clinician, we always see this evolution of the microbial organisms, evolving themselves to get a better access to humans and replicate themselves. That is the whole idea. Virus replicate itself, and when we create conditions which are not congenial for their replication, what they do, they evolve, they change their characteristics, they change their spikes, they change their chemicals, and then they get a little more aggressive towards attaching to a human and then replicate. So that is the whole idea of a variant. So there are so many variants, and to avoid again the stigma associated with what we call as a Brazil variant, Indian variant, and UK variant, and all that. So the WHO came out with this alpha, beta, gamma, delta. Alpha is not the original virus. Alpha is the first variant. You must understand that SARS-CoV-2 is the original virus, and since then we have a lot of variants. Now, you all have to understand that there are variants of concern and variants of interest. Any organism, as I told you, when it stays, it always evolve to develop into different avatars. But what we call as in genetics mutations, and there are some sensible mutations, there are some nonsense mutations, and then when the mutations are a little heavy, that can change the whole characteristics, like the infectivity of the organism, or even the virulence of the organism. Those are called variants of concern. Now, the variants of concern does not necessarily mean that they have evaded the existing vaccine. No variants of concern have completely 100% evaded the vaccines. When we go and discuss about the vaccines, I will elaborate further on that. The variants of concern means genetically we have seen a very high mutation in the microbial organism, in the virus, in the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which actually changed the characteristic with respect to the transmissibility or infectivity. And currently, we still studying if there is a change in the virulence of the organism, which has not been quite established yet. So, how do we do? How do we actually prepare vaccines? So many vaccines I listed, so many diseases. So, in general, a whole organism or a part of an organism is weakened, and a weakened organism is considered a vaccine. So, any organism, microbial organism, has its own protein. The protein is called an antigen. So when the protein gets into our system, then the antigen is now seen as a foreign body. So that is now that is what is triggering an immunological reaction. I will tell you about that. So the weakened organism or the whole organism or a part of an organism is the first way to prepare a vaccine, which has been there in the rabies vaccine, measles vaccine, polio. All of them are weakened organisms. Now, the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example, is called a vector virus. There is an adenovirus, which is a benign virus, which cannot infect anybody, which cannot cause a pathological disease in anybody. So that virus is taken, and then that virus is now we introduce the COVID virus viral particles, the spike proteins inside that vector virus, okay, and then that virus is now again prepared as a vaccine, and that is exactly what AstraZeneca type of vaccines, which has a vector virus, which is a benign virus. So that is another way to prepare a vaccine. And you all would have taken definitely tetanus toxoid, which is tetanus is a bacteria, it's not a virus. And when tetanus infects, it releases a toxin which causes the rigidity and the problem of tetanus. So what happens? What we did, what we do in the laboratory is that we isolate that bacterial toxin and we make it like a toxoid and inject to people, so that even if tetanus infects somebody, even when it releases the toxin, that toxin cannot attack the body because already we have developed resistance against the toxin. So that is another way of preparing a vaccine. The latest technology which you would have seen is the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine are actually messenger RNAs. RNA and DNA are the nucleic acids in our system, and DNA is how an organism is actually we all are made up of. The genotype of the DNA determines how I look like, what will be my eye color, what will be my skin color, what will be my hair color, and so on and so forth. So that is a DNA. The RNAs or ribonucleic acid are small nucleic acids in the cell which have plenty of functions. One of those functions is called a messenger RNA, which actually stimulates the cell to synthesize proteins. So we have a good muscle. That means because our cells, the messenger RNA says that, okay, this gentleman is doing a lot of manual work, so he needs a lot of protein, muscle protein. So the messenger RNA actually stimulates protein synthesis in the cells, and that is how we build up our proteins. So what happens in these messenger RNAs are the ones which are actually giving the cell signals to produce protein. Now, in the latest technology of the Pfizer and Moderna, we actually put in the code of the SARS-CoV-2 or the COVID-19 vaccine into a capsule, a nano capsule, which contains the messenger RNAs. So the code will get into the system. Okay, that messenger RNA is released into our human system. Now that gives the signal to produce. We actually produce the virus protein in our cells, but still it is not our own protein. It is considered as an antigen protein. It is a foreign protein, and so we develop immunity against it. So that is the latest technology of messenger RNA, mRNA vaccines. Actually, it was developed to prevent cancers. I will tell you that how it does that. But that has been actually now used for the infectious disease, because we all thought that we are we are winning the infectious disease with the vaccines and the antibiotics. So the NCDs, the non-communicable disease like cancer, we were producing vaccines for cancer, and that was the whole idea of actually doing the mRNA vaccine. But the COVID came in, and they jumped to actually produce the mRNA vaccine for the infectious disease. So that is the whole idea of, I mean, in general, how vaccines are made. So for specifically for COVID-19, we have the Oxford AstraZeneca. I told you it's a viral vector. I have, as a Caribbean Medical Journal editor-in-chief, I have gone through every single study published regarding the efficacy. It has been published in Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine, in Journal of American Medical Association, and there are everything is published. Even Sinopharm, originally it wasn't published, but it was published later, and when after that actually WHO actually approved Sinopharm. So you can see the efficacy as in the range of 78, and you can see that I'm not going to go through every single thing, but overall the efficacy rate is what is here against infection. And if you see the against hospitalization and severe illness, most of them are 100%. So when you take a vaccine, it protects the human being against severe COVID and mortality in this range. So everybody has this question about efficacy. Everybody is so excited about Pfizer showing A+ marks, 93, 95. So those are the best vaccines. That's absolutely not true. The efficacy, it doesn't mean that it will work 95% of the time, or this one will work only 70% of the time. That is not how it is. The efficacy studies are phase 3 clinical trials, which were usually done in 40,000, 50,000 patients. That's the usual range. Now they will take two groups of patients. If it is 40,000 patients, 20,000 patients will get just a saline. They won't get the vaccine. And then 20,000 patients will get the vaccine. And they will see that how many in this group are getting infected and how many in the vaccine group are getting infected by the COVID. That is exactly what they do by the phase 3 trial. So when this trial, once done in a 40,000 patient, it can give a number. When it is done in another set of 40,000 patients, it can give another number. So that is why the efficacy changes. And even this Pfizer and Moderna, which came out with the 93 and 94, because it was initial days, it was not many variants were there, and it was done, as you know, in one set of white American population, because that is what the FDA wants. They want them to do in the in USA. So the majority of the people who participated were one ethnicity. So, but if you do the same Pfizer in a different multicultural population with the same phase 3 trial, it may not show the same 93%. So the efficacy is just a number which came out of the first phase 3 trial. That doesn't mean that it is always 94% effective. So that particular thing I want to debunk, that particular misconception is extremely important, because many people, as I know, my own colleagues were waiting for Pfizer to come as if, we are going to get dropped by the helicopter or something. We cannot wait on that. So we need to have a vaccine. And I was telling that, even as my son, I gave the Sinopharm vaccine because I took the AstraZeneca vaccine because that was the only thing available at that time, because it was I'm an ICU person. They gave it for frontline workers. But Sinopharm is a time-tested vaccine, and I would have gone for the Sinopharm, because people do just get carried away by the so-called numbers, like what we see in the university. 90% they scored, so they should be very good student. Not necessarily so. Right? So that is what you have to understand, that efficacy is just a number which came over the first trial. That's all. So as of 30th July 2021, you know that how many cases, see this, 196 million confirmed cases throughout the world, 4 million plus 4.2 million deaths. And 3.8 billion doses have been given, vaccines throughout the world. Despite all the vaccine hesitancy, 3.8 vaccine doses have been given. So we have real world data now, and all those efficacy data which came out of this one trial, which was used for approval to the FDA, need not always stay there. They can be changing. And for your information, there are almost now more than 280 and 292, almost 300 vaccines are being developed for COVID alone. Okay, and 184 vaccines are in the preclinical stage, and 108 are in the clinical stage. So that is the amount of the effort put into this particular disease because of the pandemic nature. So how does a vaccine work? As I told you, the antigen, the foreign protein, when it goes into the human system, it is sensed by the humans, the immune cells, and then all the white cells will come in, and then they will produce specific antibodies. We have something called lymphocytes and neutrophils. Neutrophils is for the bacterial infection. When the virus comes in, the lymphocytes come. There are two types of lymphocytes. One is called a B lymphocyte, another T lymphocyte. So the B lymphocytes actually senses these foreign proteins and then secretes specific antibodies. And that's why this particular diagram, you can see that for a pink virus, it will be a different antibody. This virus is a different antibody. So it has to be a specific antibody. And then the T lymphocytes, we have something called a killer cell and a helper cell. So those are the T lymphocytes, which will actually, you would have heard this in the HIV. There are CD4 cells and CD8 cells and T cells. Those have specific functions. So when you inject an antigen as a vaccine, so this antigen is taken up by a cell and presented to the cells, the B cells and the T cells, and they have a memory, and the B cells secrete all these antibodies, and the T cells actually help in long-term cell-mediated immunity. HIV exists for 25 years. We don't have a vaccine. You know why? Because it actually kills the CD4 cells. So you would have known that, what is the CD4 count for a HIV infected person. So that is why, and it immediately evades the, when you develop a vaccine, by the time the vaccine is undergoing a clinical trial, the HIV virus would have evolved and it escapes the whole antigen and the immunological memory. And that is why we are unable to get a HIV vaccine. Now, we are fortunate that this coronavirus, we have studied coronavirus very, very much in detail, and we can develop vaccine, and we could get a vaccine within a year, and that was very fortunate for us to get the pandemic out of our this one. But still, because of the hesitancy, we are unable to get it, eradicated, the pandemic. So I told you about the mRNA vaccine, that how the mRNA vaccine actually, causes a cancer immunotherapy. For breast cancer and prostate cancer, they were developing this mRNA vaccine. And in my lifetime, I can tell you that, in the next 10 years, there will be vaccine for breast cancer as well as prostate cancer. So it was going rapidly. And at this point of time, they had to stop and come to this infectious disease, and they will go back to the cancer immunotherapy. So there's so much of research going on in this type of a mRNA vaccine, right? So everybody has this question as to how come COVID-19, everything takes so much time, and they came out within 3 months. It was not 3 months. This was a warp speed. Actually, it was extremely, highly efficient, process was undertaken. European Union, US, everybody pumped money to develop vaccines. All these days, vaccines were not, it's not that we couldn't develop, but it did not affect everybody. I can tell you the classic example of Ebola. Ebola was actually discovered in 1970s in Africa, and nobody bothered about it. Nobody bothered because it never came out of the Ebola, the African continent. And we do have, I'm ashamed to say that WHO has a list of what we call as a neglected tropical disease. It is neglected because it does not affect the white man. I'm sorry to again bring this ethnic issue into this, but that is how it is. That is how it is, because Ebola did not cross the shores of Africa. Nobody bothered to develop a vaccine from 1970s. The last time when President Obama was the president, and it had a little scare that, out of a Democratic Republic of Congo, it can come into United States. So Ebola has an 80% mortality, unlike COVID, which is 2.5% mortality. Then they rushed and they got the vaccine within 2 years. Ebola vaccine was there. So it is the question of how much money and effort is put into vaccine. And currently, I can tell you that they have nucleic acid technology and the genetic technology, which can be done right in the lab, right here in UV. My colleagues are doing. If they would have been funded to develop a vaccine, they could have done it. We don't have that priority. That's why we are not doing it. We still depend on the in the developed world and rich world to give us the vaccine. We have the technology nowadays. So that is why we are able to expedite the production of the vaccine. And all these steps were undertaken for COVID-19 vaccine. Hundreds of thousands of patients were tested. Safety and efficacy were tried in the phase 3 trials, like any other vaccine. Okay, but they called it emergency use authorization, EUA. Why? Because any vaccine, any organization which actually approves a vaccine cannot give a full authorization until like it exists for 5 to 10 years. They will see the phase 4. I showed you here phase 1, 2, and 3. Phase 4 trial is something which is actually real world data over a long period of time. And then only they will give the full authorization. So emergency use authorization is the first step which happens in the vaccine. And at this time, we need to have the emergency use authorization, because as long as we have enough safety trials, we need to eradicate this pandemic. Billions of dollars are being are wasted, and not only dollars, millions of lives are being lost. So we need to actually do this emergency use authorization, not because any vaccine company paid the FDA or EMA or the WHO. It is to save lives, and those are the saving lives and bringing an end to the pandemic is the only goal, and there is no ulterior motive in emergency use authorization, right? So that's why the COVID-19 vaccines were quick, because we had enough studies about coronaviruses, and they grabbed those coronavirus attributes, and then we could easily take a vector virus, adenovirus, and then we could the Oxford Oxford was the first one to come that way, and that is why the vaccines could come faster. Yes, there are issues with the vaccine apartheid, with the geopolitical issues are there. We can discuss that. I am not saying that everything is pink and rosy, but what I can tell you is that the vaccines were not brought in with any ulterior motive. That's all I will say at this point of time. And so many things, I can tell you that production started simultaneously. So when Oxford developed the technology of the adenovirus, they shared that technique with the vaccine producing centers. And in India, I know that in Serum Institute, they actually produced millions of vaccines, even if there is no approval and the vaccine fails in the clinical trials. They were ready to actually throw it off. They wanted to actually keep things prepared, because it was a pandemic which was paralyzing the whole world. And so the production was started with the idea to throw if the FDA or the EMA doesn't approve of it. So that's why we got the vaccines in a faster rate. Otherwise they will go through individual step, and then by the time production starts and then we get the vaccine, it will be 5 to 6 years. Now, as I told you, billions of vaccines have been administered, and most countries, you have something called adverse effects following immunization. AEFI reports is being regularly collected by PAHO, WHO, and individual countries. And we submit our adverse effects to PAHO. So the major thing you have to understand here is that billions of vaccines are administered, and there are people who will get diseases. I will tell you a classic example. My neighbor's mom actually developed stroke couple of months back. Okay, that time we didn't have the vaccine. We did all the CT scan, MRI, everything. Nobody could find out what is the reason. So she had a sudden episode of high blood pressure and developed a stroke. Okay, she developed a stroke. And let me tell you, if this would have happened after the vaccine, they would have attributed that, oh, she developed a stroke because of the vaccine. Because billions of people are being vaccinated, people develop diseases according to the normal incidence of a disease, and we cannot attribute every single disease developing in the community to the vaccines alone. So that is where the adverse effects problems will come in. So people die every day, even with vaccine, without vaccine. So we cannot say that the vaccine is the one which caused the death. So that is why we need to know about the usual effects of a vaccine, which is soreness and pain at the injection site. You can have fever and chills and body aches, and usually it subsides within 2 days. 48 hours is the maximum. I had it for 2 days. I mean, a night and the next day, full day, and then everything subsided on its own. So beyond that, if it is there, then you can have some sort of an adverse effect of the vaccine. So you can see the skin rashes, the allergy. Anaphylaxis is a very severe form of allergy which can happen with Pfizer and Moderna. And I know of my own classmates who were living in UK were waiting on the AstraZeneca because the Pfizer and the Moderna had a higher incidence of anaphylaxis when compared to AstraZeneca and Sinopharm. So it all depends on the pharmaceuticals and the pharmaceutical ingredients of a vaccine. So this Pfizer and Moderna has some sort of a lipid particles because of the nanocapsule, so they can have a anaphylactic reaction. So these are common. Even when you take a paracetamol, some people can be allergic to paracetamol, which will be, which I have seen allergy to very strange medications. So the triggering of the immune reaction can happen. It can affect the other systems like joints and stuff like that. But all these adverse effects are extremely minuscule. It is being published by the AEFI reports. And the adenovirus vaccines, which are the AstraZeneca, Johnson and Johnson, and also the Russian vaccine, Sputnik vaccine, these are the vaccines which are associated with very, very rare clots, which I will tell you the incidence. So these are the AEFI reports from Canada and India. Canada, 45 million. After 45 million vaccination, 0.017% non-serious, 0.006 serious side effects, which includes what we call as the clots, which is called what we call thrombocytopenic syndrome. That is why it's a TTS. So that is the clot, which is 67 in 47.5 million doses. So which is very, 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 very small. And the TTS happened in female gender, and you would have seen that in very, very rare, very similar incidence of myocarditis, 1 in a million person can develop a myocarditis after Pfizer vaccine. And India, after 75 million dose, the same clots, they had 0.61 in a million. It was extremely rare. And then we have seen rare side effects, including neurological problems, which we call, generalized neurological illness and Bell's palsy. And I must say that Sinopharm, because of its time-tested technology, which is which is a weekend attenuated vaccine, has a reasonably good safety profile, and the Sinopharm is not an adenovirus vector, so it cannot be associated with the thrombotic thrombocytopenic, which is the clots. Sinopharm has never been associated with clots, even now. Not even one case has been reported. So all I would say is that when it's your turn, you must take your vaccine. It is not only to protect yourself, and then it is important to be vaccinated because it offers what we call as a immunity in our community. So that is called the herd immunity. So what happens in a herd immunity? Indirect protection from the infection conferred on the susceptible persons in the community. So you can see here that when there is a person who can transmit. When there are vaccinated people, even when they are susceptible people, they will be protected by the vaccinated people. So that is what is herd immunity, and this is very well scientifically established. So there are two ways of achieving it. Like in the 1918 Spanish flu, we achieved herd immunity by losing a lot of people because everybody got infected, and according to the statistics which I showed, that many people may die. Think of 100,000 people getting infected in Trinidad. So we will lose to 25,000 people. So that is not 2,500 people. That is not what we want. That's for 100,000. For 1 million, we'll get 25,000 people. So 2.5 is the percentage. And do we want to actually spread the disease and people to die and then achieve the herd immunity? That is not the best way. We have to have the vaccine, and that will do the same herd immunity. So when we have the herd immunity threshold, so for COVID, it is around 80%. That is the current. So unless we get 80% of our population vaccinated, we cannot expect any herd immunity. And as I told you, the vaccine have reduced the incidence of disease so much, 100% in many of these diseases, more than 99% in measles. And you would have known that when the anti-vaxxers started avoiding their children about not giving the measles vaccine, we had an epidemic in outbreak in New York last year. Not last year, in 2019 actually. So this is herd immunity is very well established and very well studied. Okay, so the common queries I get is, does our genetic code change because of vaccine? No. Do they track us by a vaccine? Absolutely no. Do they cause infertility? No. And the other question which everybody asks, that when you have a live attenuated vaccine, do they shed virus? No. Pregnant women can take virus, yes. And can persons with high blood pressure, diabetes, and heart-lung disease can take vaccine? Yes. Can persons take two different types of vaccine? That is also yes. We have a lots of evidence. We have a technical term for it, heterologous prime boost. But we need to wait until the political directorate or the WHO gives okay to go ahead with that. So until then, but there is scientific evidence that we can take two different type of vaccines. Okay, so the one query which I ask everybody is that, has any scripture ever mentioned about a vaccine? And to my knowledge, I must say that comparative religion and philosophy is my favorite pastime, and I have never seen anybody mentioning about a vaccine. And any religion, I would think that the overall well-being of human beings and community, they will support. So what I want to end my talk is by saying something about the infodemic. And there was a study in American Society of Anesthesiology, which the anesthesiologists, they found that in 1950s, people had much more trust in medicine and science than in 2020s because of social media. And we saw that happening yesterday. Somebody was hurt, a premier of a Caribbean island country was hurt because of this misinformation. So anybody who gets a computer or a cell phone, absolutely no censor, no oversight, and absolutely they can write anything. So that has created this infodemic, and there are very many things which we can avoid by how to navigate against the infodemic. What I would want to say is that when it is this infodemic, you have to first, when you get a group, in your group chat, you get I got really authentic looking text messages, but when you do a fact check from authentic sites, you will know that that is wrong. So the people have ulterior motives to actually send the tweets and send the chats. And so I do think that, please fact check before you spread the message. And so in summary, I want to give you the take home message. Vaccines have saved millions of lives. and increased the life expectancy. And COVID-19 vaccines were developed and approved with the same exact rigor we used for other vaccines. Vaccination, I am not saying that it is completely risk-free. It's like any other medical intervention, but the risks are minuscule, and that is why we went ahead and approved of it. The benefits definitely outweigh the risk, and please fact check all the messages. And I say that, I hear all this from my own nurses saying that, oh, let everybody take and we will get the herd immunity. If everybody thinks that way, we will never ever be able to achieve the herd immunity. So every one of us should contribute to achieve the herd immunity. And also the most important thing, the longer the virus stays, we will get more and more variants of concern, and the deadlier will be the virus. So thank you for the opportunity. This particular thing I wanted to show you that before we had the polio epidemic, polio vaccines, this was an ICU, which those days they didn't even have a ventilator. They had something called an iron lung ventilator. Every patient had to go inside the iron lung to get ventilator because polio was crippling them from preventing from breathing. And we have eradicated polio with vaccines, and we don't want to go back to these 1800s. And that is all I want to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity.